This is how the Arab Muslims destroyed African Christianity across the whole of North Africa and damaged African Christianity in Egypt. And all of you black nationalists, Hebrew Israelites, Nation of Islam, Callum philosophy, you're all silent about it because you're intimidated by Muslim gangs in the hood.
Oh, shit.
You can see Btbsoco doing a presentation. Here we content here in the house.
Hey, Btbsoco in the house.
Come on, content! Come on, Btbsoco.
You can.
Okay.
Cool. What I'm saying now is, yeah, I'm not necessarily arguing whether or not it's going to be related to my next question.
Yeah.
The impact Christianity has on Africa. Allow me, sucker. I beg you, allow me. It's going to be related to my next question, but right now I'm just trying to find out the facts of the situation, regardless of who it favors.
Sure.
Or how it affected anybody.
I'll answer it insofar as I know.
Okay, I just want to know what the actual source is of Christianity and how it came to Africa, or if it is an African, indigenously African spiritual system, which some people argue. So I'm just trying to get clarity.
My argument is that the history shows that it is as much African as it is European.
No, but that's not the question I'm asking. I want to know the foundation of it. Like
the foundation is on the apostles.
Yeah.
The teachings of the apostles is the foundation, and they were Palestinian Jews. They lived in the Middle East in what we call Israel today and what we call Palestine today. That's where Christianity originated from. Christianity is a Middle Eastern faith, but the connection of the Christian faith.
Does that describe the formation of the actual religion?
Well, let's just talk about it. Yeah, the connection of the Christian faith is deep in Africa. And let me explain why. Because our Lord himself, when he fled from Herod, where did he flee to? He fled to Egypt. Where did God draw out the people of Israel? He drew them out of Egypt. Christianity, the Judeo-Christian faith, and Egypt, which is an African country, a Coptic country, not an Arab country. That is a lie of the Arabs.
Liar.
It is a Coptic country, an Egyptian country. They, the Coptic Christians, call themselves not Arabs as the Muslims do.
Nah.
They call themselves the Copts.
Yeah.
They call themselves the descendants of the pharaohs. Somebody call the Copts. Yeah. I suggest, Leon, you call the Copts. You go speak to the Copts, Leon.
That's right.
Yeah. Not the police. We're not talking about no police. We're talking about the Copts. All of you black identitarians who want to connect with African spirituality, go talk to the Copts. Go talk to the Ethiopian Christians. These are the original Christians of Africa. Now let's talk about the impact of Christianity in Africa.
I don't know if that really answers the question.
Then maybe I've misunderstood the question.
Yeah.
Ask it again, Leo.
Again. Christianity started in the Middle East.
Alright, cool. Let's look into that. I'm talking about the actual religion, not just the people. Not was it formed there in terms of this is where the theology comes from, or this is the teaching.
Right, okay, I get you.
Oh no, the actual this is how we're going to practice Christianity.
Okay, I'm getting you. Right, I understand, Leon. Leo, stop putting on the camera. We'll blur out. You'll blur out your face, Leon. We'll blur out your face.
No, we can't blur the content, bro.
So anyway, to answer his question directly, Christianity started because a group of Palestinian Jews had a life-changing experience, that the one that they believed to be the Messiah, who they saw died, they witnessed as having risen from the dead. This transformed their life, and then they went out and started founding communities right across the Roman world on that experience. and this is Christianity. Now, the thing is that Christianity, that politic, that community, developed in history, it developed in time. And so its forms, its functions, the way it expressed its beliefs, the way that it defined itself in contrast to oppositions, is something that developed historically. And in that sense, you can rightly say that the African church was exactly that, an African expression of that reality, of that truth.
I think I've got the question as clear as I can get it in my head. Let's look at an analogy to help understand what I'm trying to express.
Have I still not got your question? I really thought I'd got it then.
It's a bit here, I don't know, listen. I'm going to use this analogy, if you agree with me then.
Yeah.
Or if this makes sense to me. Did the formation of Christianity was outside Africa? I want to discuss that as well after.
Yeah.
The initial, the foundations,
Yeah.
to a degree, the vanguard,
Yeah.
the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. The pin, the point of the spear.
Yeah. So, was it the case that there was something called Christianity outside of Africa that got taken into Africa, that got adapted and developed and built upon at the foundation level? You could argue. Initially, was there something called Christianity outside of Africa?
I think in the best way that I understand your question, I can say the answer is yes. There was an initial transformative experience to the apostles. But what you've got to understand, Leon, and I think many of
I'm just asking for clarity.
Yeah, I'm going to. But what you've got to understand, Leon, is that there was no Pan-Africanism back then. There was a Roman Empire that stretched across the Mediterranean basin, and people in that empire didn't think of themselves as African or Middle Eastern or European. They thought of themselves by their tribe, whatever that tribe happened to be, and then they thought of themselves as Roman subjects or as Roman citizens. And that is how their matrix of identity was operating. So when Christianity spread, it spread in the incubator of the Roman Empire, which was around the Mediterranean basin, including North Africa. And North Africans played their part in forming the ecclesiology. They played their part in forming the church. And actually, that's just a fancy word for church. They formed they played their part in defending orthodoxy, in defending the teaching of the apostles.
I want to know if the fundamentals was
the fundamentals,
before it came to
yes, with the apostles. And what happened is the Africans then developed on top of their teaching, just like the Europeans developed on top of their teaching. And that development had its major hiccup in the 5th century, and God willing should have come to some kind of resolution, but we don't know what the future might have held, because what then happened is that Arab Muslims invaded non-Muslim lands, imposed Islam on those areas, and slowly destroyed the African church. Except in Egypt and Ethiopia, where Ethiopians fought to defend their Christian identity against numerous Islamic jihads. And there is a new jihad starting in Ethiopia that the world needs to hear about and the world needs to stand against. There is a slave trade going off in Africa, an Islamic one, where black children are still being sold. And the world needs to hear about it and stand against it. I want to come back to something that you said. Have I answered your question in a way you feel? Let me use an analogy.
No, yeah, I've got that still. I've got that. I think your answer is. I'm satisfied with your answer.
Okay.
But now there's an argument that I've heard the other day.
Okay.
Literally yesterday.
Yeah.
That Palestine, Israel, what's referred to as that part there,
yeah,
is technically Africa. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm not saying I disagree with it. I'm just saying, I don't know if you're aware of the argument.
I know that there is a massive...
And sorry, just to clarify as well. Basically, I'm saying, is the people that was there, like genetically now we're talking.
Okay.
Are they the same people that are in Ethiopia now?
So let me address that point directly. The fact of the matter is that the Jewish people lived in bondage in Egypt for hundreds of years. And that started with, oh gosh, I'm going to get it wrong now, Jacob and his brothers. I know, and they were the sons of, oh my gosh, Isaac? No,
Isaac, that's right.
Was it Isaac?
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm having you know, when your mind just goes blank.
Abraham, Isaac.
Jacob, yes, there you go. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So it was Isaac and his Jacob and his brothers who went to Egypt. Like, there's that population of people. They didn't just marry in amongst themselves. They would have married Egyptian women. That's logical and that's fair. So interwoven into the genetics of the people of Israel will be the genetics of the Coptic people.
It might have happened. On what scale though? Because even like in this country, or all countries all over the world, generally people, as much as they do mix for the whole, they stick to their own.
Yeah, and I think that's also probably true back then as well, if not a bit more so. So there would have been some bringing in of Coptic blood.
I'm saying the mixture would be the exception rather than the rule.
Yes, but it would still be there. So my point to you is, what I'm saying is, I mean, bearing in mind that Abraham didn't come from Palestine. Abraham came from Iraq. Yeah, he didn't come from Palestine. You know, so the point is, for me, Leon.
So wait,
well, 1 second, Leon. Right, for me, Leon, genetics isn't that important.
No, the reason I'm asking is I'm coming from a purist standpoint, where
a pure racialist standpoint.
Maybe. No, truth.
I don't think you're prejudiced. I'm not using that in a derogative.
My theology generally in life is before I adopt something foreign in order to be beneficial for me, I want to explore my own self. See if I've got my own version.
Yeah.
That I'm more I'm more familiar with. I'm more
yeah.
But I'm not so ignorant to the point that if I recognize something as being better than my own version, I'm not going to go with the. I want to go where the truth takes me. I've heard you say that.
Thanks be to God.
Have the. Did you say?
Have the courage.
The truth contradicts your
belief. Change your beliefs.
Yeah. Have the courage to go
follow
where the truth takes you.
Yeah, amen.
I'm with that. I read that.
Yeah.
But I want to understand before I make those decisions.
Yeah.
As much as I can about myself and my own indigenous practices before I adopt or look for any. If I'm going to do search, I'm going to start from home, basically.
Yeah, and I totally support that. And the reason why I totally support that, Leon, is because I can stand here confidently as a white man and say that Christianity is as much African as it is European. The only reason why Christianity became viewed as a European thing is because Christians in Europe managed to stop the Islamic armies from conquering our lands in a way that the African Christians did not manage to. And so Christianity developed from a position of power in Europe, where it developed as a position of persecution in Egypt. But, Leon, Christianity did develop as a position of power in Ethiopia. For 2,000 years, the Ethiopians alone, amongst all African peoples, managed to determine their own lives. They were the only African nation that managed to stop Islamic deliberate jihads. They managed not only to survive them but to repel them, but then they also managed to stop the colonial armies as well. And I want you to remember that it was Portuguese Christians in the 15th century, white European Christians, who joined with Ethiopian Christians to fight Islamic armies. Why? Because those Portuguese Christians recognized that when they looked at the black African Ethiopian, they recognized that they were looking at a brother and sister in Christ. And they died with them, and they fought with them, and they defeated Islamic jihad together. White man and black man together against Arab imperialism, against Arab occupation, against Arabization, against Islamization. Christianity is an African faith. Let me tell you, the Coptic Church is an African church. It has established charitable hospitals around Africa to help other Africans.
It's an African church with foundations in Palestine.
Every church has a foundation in Palestine. There is no church on earth.
I just don't want to misrepresent the details.
I've said it as clearly as I can. I don't know how much more clearly I can say it.
If you say it's an African, it's not purely African, it's basically what I'm saying.
There is no church.
According to what you just said.
There is no church anywhere in the world, India, Europe or Africa, that didn't start in Palestine. However, when it took roots in Africa, the Copts made it their own.
I'm with that.
They made it their faith. It wasn't imposed upon them. Remember, Leon, that Christianity didn't start as an empire. It didn't start with the sword in its hand. It started amongst the common man. It started at the ground level. Christians were persecuted for their first 300 years. So when Christianity blossomed in Coptic Egypt, I don't know if Coptopia is the way to describe it, but when it established itself in Egypt, it established itself by the willing acceptance of the people, not through imposition, not through persecution, like the Christians of Egypt suffered under the Islamic caliphates, when their churches were destroyed, when their churches were desecrated, when their brothers and sisters were told that they couldn't do their processions in the streets, that they couldn't ring their bells, that they couldn't have their churches next to a mosque, when they had to go to the caliph even to ask to repair their churches. And so many Coptic churches fell into disrepair and ended up falling down. And then the Christians were forced to build their churches outside of the cities. And they were forced to have their doors not onto the main high street but onto the side roads. And they were told that their prayers couldn't be heard by the Muslims. And when they were walking down the streets, the Arab Muslims would force them into the narrowest part of the road. And they would force them to wear clothes that distinguished them as Coptic Christians. They had to wear yellow belts. They had to ride on donkeys because they couldn't ride on horses. They were not allowed to carry swords. This is how the Arab Muslims destroyed African Christianity across the whole of North Africa and damaged African Christianity in Egypt.
Perfect.
And all of you black nationalists, Hebrew Israelites, Nation of Islam, Callum philosophy, you're all silent about it because you're intimidated by Muslim gangs in the hood.
Oh, shit.
You need to, if you want to claim black Pan-African identity, start speaking up about this history, about African Christian history. Remember, it wasn't imposed from above. It was indigenous. One of the first Christian kingdoms outside of Armenia was Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Negus was the one who took in Muslims out of a Christian sense of hospitality and justice. What a historical mistake that was.
Are you talking about when Muhammad went there?
When Muhammad sent some Christians, he sent them to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Sorry, he sent some Muslims, he sent them to Ethiopia.
Because they was getting persecuted.
Yeah.
thought Prophet Muhammad went there as well. The Muslims.
I don't know, I don't believe Muhammad did. But the thing is, one of those companions actually became a Christian in Ethiopia.
I've heard the reverse, that the king converted to Islam after.
It's a lie.
It's a lie.
The Muslims lie about, Leon, Muslims lie about history.
I'm saying it's the truth. I'm saying, have you heard that?
It's a lie.
You're aware of it? It's not the first time you're hearing this.
No, it's the first time I'm hearing it, but I'm confident it is a lie. The reality is that Muslims often rewrite history. They rewrite history all the time. The Muslim Dawah people, they point towards colonial slave trade, which was a crime that went on for 300 years as a crime. But they're silent about the 1400 years Islamic slave trade. Where can I buy a black African child today if I want to? I go to Khartoum, I go to Chad. Is Khartoum a Christian city or a Muslim one? Is Chad a Christian country or a Muslim country? I go to Mauritania. Is that Christian or Muslim? Learn your history. Go and speak to the Coptic Christians about how they practice their Christian faith. Go and speak to the Ethiopian Christians about how they practice their Christian faith. I don't want you to follow a white man's Christianity. Go and follow a black man's Christianity.
Go follow the truth.
Go follow the truth and join into the commonwealth of the church. And that commonwealth in the 15th century saw Portuguese Christians from the Catholic Church and Ethiopian Christians from the Ethiopian Church fight against Islamic Jihad together in the 15th century. That's where real Christian spirituality for the Pan-African belongs. There. Bear in mind, it was Arab Muslims who killed 2 million. Did you hear that, Leon? 2 million African Christians in South Sudan in 18 years of jihad in which they sought to Arabize the South. That is why there is now an independent country in South Sudan, because the African Christians said, we will not be Arabized. We want to keep our Christianity, and they took up arms and they fought for 18 years against a jihad that happened in the 20th century.
So in the process, they lost 2 million.
2 million Africans were killed by jihadis. And too many Pan-Africans are there still talking about crimes that happened hundreds of years ago by the white man, and you're silent about the crimes of the Arab Muslims that are happening today to African Christians. Is it Boko Haram? Is that Christian or Muslim? How many Africans are dying at the hands of Boko Haram? How many African Christians are dying at the, what's the tribe called? The tribe that travels. The Arab Muslim tribe that travels there, a nomadic tribe, I forget their name.
Bedouin?
Bedouin. Not Bedouin, that's an Arab tribe. I can't remember. What? Maybe, yes, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I think it's the Fulani. Forgive me if it's not the Fulani, someone will correct me in the comments.
I know they're Muslims, so the Fulani.
But they are killing African Christians. That's what's happening. So African Christians in Ethiopia, African Christians across Africa, unite, stand together.
So you're making a claim that it's Muslims that are doing these things. See, like how when you're saying that the Christians, certain bad ones, that came in the name of Christ and was committing atrocities to Africans as well. Would you say that they are Christians that was just doing bad things, or would you say that they ain't Christians and wouldn't do their practices?
I am not going to do what the Dawah teams here in the corner and pretend that that Christians have never done any bad things. Like, that's Adnan's trick. It's not my trick. Christians did bad things in Africa, European Christians.
But they was acting against the teachings of their religion, whereas in this case they're saying that the Muslims that are committing these atrocities.
Yes,
I would say that you're arguing. I don't know. I'm asking. Are you arguing that they're acting according to instruction from their religious schools.
Yeah, let me address that point directly. So to address that point directly and clearly, when Christians went into Africa and started trading in slaves, they were acting against Christian tradition, against biblical teaching, and they were doing it more out of Enlightenment philosophy. You see, Christians had all but abandoned the slave trade amongst themselves in Europe. So why did they suddenly start why did they do that? They did that because of Christianity. Why did they start trading in other human beings? It was because of the Enlightenment philosophy that emerged around the 1600s and 1700s, and that's where the slave trade started. Were Christians complicit in that act? Most certainly they were, but there were many Christians who fought against it even back then. The Jesuits and the Franciscans in Latin America were arguing against slave trade, against European colonialists in Latin America. Now, you asked about the jihads that happened. I am sure, I'm going to answer the question. I am sure that not every action of those jihadis can be justified by Islamic teachings. Not every action. But the narrative that justifies using violence against other religious communities has been well testified to in Islamic sources and Islamic practice. And that is fair. And so, yes, those jihads that killed 2 million African Christians in South Sudan, that all you Pan-Africans are so silent about, that horrific crime that happened in the 20th century, that crime was justified by Islamic teaching.
You're talking rubbish. All right, I want to go into if you believe Christianity. I don't know what your understanding is of any African spirituality, quote-unquote religions prior to Christianity on the continent.
Yep.
I don't know your understanding of it. Mine is very limited. I would prefer a man like Shakara to be there because he'd be more suited to have this discussion still. But in terms of Christianity and the effect it potentially could have and is having on Africans on the continent, do you believe that it's beneficial for them to adapt it if they haven't already, as opposed to trying to use their own?
Yeah, so let me deal with that. Christianity is different from Islam in a fundamental way. Christianity is an incarnational religion because we believe that God incarnated into human flesh and dwelt amongst us. Which means that when Christians enter into cultures, our view is that what the point of Christianity is that the yeast leavens the whole. The point of the Christian faith is to make the Ethiopian a better Ethiopian, or the Tutsi a better Tutsi, or the Fulani a better Fulani. The point of Christianity is not to make the Fulani an Arab, is not to make the Ethiopian an Arab, is not to make the Tutsi an Arab, but to make them their better self. So you see at the moment in the Vatican, the Vatican is having what's called the Amazonian Synod, which means that what they are looking at is how can the indigenous people of the Amazon express their Christian faith in a way that is true to the gospel and the truths of the gospel, and true to their Amazonian identity as an indigenous people. And that is exactly what Christianity should do in every culture. When the Jesuits went...
I want to run to the car and get my umbrella, you know. Can you continue on?
Yeah. Okay. When the Jesuits went to Japan, they went to Japan and they tried to strip their Christianity, their preaching of Christianity, of everything that was European, and adapt and adopt everything that they could that was Japanese. Christians in India practiced a form of Christianity that was adaptive to Indian culture, which is why the St. Thomas Christians of India have an order of religious nuns that dance like the Hindu temple priestesses dance in their temples. You see, the point of the Christian faith isn't to impose the culture of the missionary upon the indigenous. That happens by accident. The idea of the Christian faith is that you elevate the culture that you take the gospel into by contrast. And that means that people keep their indigenous languages. The Copts kept speaking Coptic, the Ethiopians kept speaking their own language. The Japanese spoke in Japanese. They worshipped in forms that were correct to themselves. So I've been to Japan, I've experienced Christianity in Japan. In Europe, when you show homage, it is European custom to bow. And so Europeans, they kneel in homage to God. You go to Egypt, you go to Japan, they don't do that. There's no concept of this kind of kneeling. Instead, you bow, a deep bow. And so that's what they do in in Japan. So the fact is, Christianity, when it is at its best, elevates and leavens the culture it goes into. It seeks to take away that which is bad and magnify that which is good. By contrast, one more final point on that. And it does that because it doesn't have a system of laws. It has a system of values that transforms the human heart that then can express itself in the local culture. Now, by contrast, Arab Muslims, when they go into a land, what do they say? They say that you must imitate Muhammad in what he did, and in many ways, the way that he did it. And so you see, where Islam has dominated, that people lose their indigenous culture. The Assyrians lost their indigenous culture. Assyria is in Iraq, by the way. The Assyrian Christians lost their indigenous culture and were Arabized. The Copts lost their indigenous culture and were Arabized. The Numidians of Sudan lost their indigenous culture and were Arabized. It was my pleasure many years ago to meet a refugee from North Sudan. Why was she a refugee from North Sudan? Because the Arab Islamist government had decided to build a dam, the backwash of which would wipe away historical sites of the Namibian people. And this Muslim Sudanese woman, who wasn't really practicing Islam, didn't really care about it, but was proud of her Namibian identity, organized a very gentle protest against the government, and she had to flee for her life. She had to flee for her life because Arabization and Islamization go together, and they don't respect local indigenous culture. By Christian standards, we're called to be a light that shines in the darkness, a light that shines on a hill. We're called to be yeast that leavens the whole. We're called to be the salt that keeps the goodness of the thing into which it is salty. These are the kind of imagery that is used in the Bible. And so Christians, we seek to take what is good in a culture and maintain it, and simply remove that which is wrong in a culture. Now, what happened in Egypt and Ethiopia is an example of an indigenous African church. What happened in the 1800s and 1700s was unthinking Europeans came and they brought with them their European culture as well as Christianity. And so you see the comical display in Africa of lots of churches with really steep roofs. Those are European because we have snow. You don't need those in places where you don't have lots of snow. So there were examples of places where Christians failed to do that. But look at what happened when Christians went to the land of the Pushtun and the land of the Punjabi. Muslims had dominated that land for centuries and never given them an alphabet to speak their own language. It was Christian missionaries who codified the alphabet. I think it was Punjabi, but I know there's many languages in that region. It was Christian missionaries who codified that alphabet. Christian missionaries codified the language of the Slavic people. The alphabet that is used in Eastern Europe was developed by Christian monks. Why? Because we take and develop the local culture. That is Christianity at its best. That is the church at its best.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
You said that there is no law within Christianity.
Yeah.
So the law that was presented unto Moses, do you think that we shouldn't conform to those commandments?
So it's a good question and it's a fair one. Thank you very much. I don't want to get too far off the topic though.
The topic being?
The topic being African Christianity.
Okay.
But Christianity needs to be understood as essentially a covenantal system. When you read the Bible, you got to understand that there were covenants set up by God with man, by God with Adam and Eve, by God with Noah, by God with Abraham, by God with Moses, and then God promises a new covenant that will come with his Messiah, and when Christ comes, a new covenant is established. And in that new covenant, the old covenant is fulfilled. It is deepened and transformed, so it doesn't remain the same. And that is what Christianity is.
But doesn't he take it further? The law, doesn't he take it further where it says even if you have hate in your heart, then
that's what I'm saying. It's deepened and transformed.
So, but there are laws to which, as a Christian, one has to conform to, right?
The Christians must obey secular law, and those laws have to be decided by Christian values and Christian teaching.
But adulterers and murderers aren't going to heaven, basically.
Yeah, God will judge those things.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's an example of. But Christ said that if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. Whereas Moses would have understood adultery as a physical act.
Yeah.
You know, so it deepened and transformed. But I don't want to get too far off the point. So, Leon, is there any kind of further question you want to ask? Because I have talked at length about this topic. Well, yeah, go on,
so
brother.
You said Christianity elevates cultures. So you're suggesting the cultures are less than.
I'm saying that all man has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and then for all cultures fall short of the glory of God because all cultures are man-made, and that Christianity should elevate that which is good within every culture. We would all agree infanticide is an evil thing. Would we all agree that? Well, right now,
What if you're a lion?
in the Amazon,
Lions do it.
in the Amazon, they bury children alive if they are handicapped.
That's brilliant.
Now, that's what they do in an Amazonian indigenous culture.
All of them are
Certain tribes. But that is a common practice in Amazonian indigenous culture. I can understand from a human point of view why it's done. From a survival point of view why it's done. However, Christianity ultimately talks about compassion and about helping the weak. So what would Christianity do to the Amazonian culture? Would it say to them, right, you all have to now start speaking English? No. They can worship God in their own language. They don't have to worship God in Arabic, hint, hint. But what they can do is worship God in their own language, but Christianity would oppose infanticide, as it has always done and still does today in the
tell them
West.
to worship Jesus,
when we
though,
when we oppose
You would encourage
abortion.
them to worship Jesus quite strongly.
Absolutely.
Is that good?
Yes.
Do you think that
But I'm addressing his question.
But didn't you say Christianity codified languages in certain places?
In certain places it helped to codify language because those people didn't have an alphabet, so there was no alphabet to write the scriptures in,
But why do they need the alphabet?
so that they could read the scriptures. So the scriptures could be written in their local language. You see, one of the differences between Christianity and Islam is that Christianity says here, read the Bible in your own language because God can speak to you in your own language. Islam says, learn Arabic. Learn Arabic. So that means that already everyone is subject to the Arab man. Because the Arab man has to tell you what God said and tells you how to read Arabic. And even the Arabs can't agree sometimes on what the words mean. The fact of the matter is that Christianity says that the truth of the message is translatable. Yes, there can be accuracies and inaccuracies of translation, but an Ethiopian can read in Ethiopian, a Copt can read in Coptic, an Arab can read in Arabic, an Englishman can read in English, and you can worship God in that language. And you don't... Go on.
Why is there such an emphasis? I've noticed that anytime you're talking about in opposition to something, you mention Islam, do you believe that to be as opposed to like Judaism or any other system, Voodoo or anything?
I mean, I'll address that point very clearly. The Muslim Dawah team, in nearly every conversation that you watch or hear, will always throw in something about Christianity in every talk, regardless of who they're talking to. So if they can do it in the park, I can do it in the park. And if they don't like it, tough, stop doing it.
So it's purely because Muslims do it.
If they can do it in the park, I can do it in the park.
I'm not saying you shouldn't do it or you can't do it. I just want to know
Because in the park, the biggest competitor to the Christian faith is Islam.
Shouldn't we be a better example as followers of Christ?
No, I think that's wimps talk. Yeah, I do. I think the way that you win is by winning and handing over the best weapons to your enemy ensures that you're defeated.
Do you think Hebrew made it to the African plains before Christ?
What do you mean Hebrew, sorry?
Hebrew, like, do you think the
language?
Yeah, the teaching, the text. Because in the Americas, I remember hearing that there was a stone found in someone's grave. I can't remember how many thousands of years ago, but it had the commandments on it written in Hebrew.
Yeah.
In the Americas.
Well, this is something that I wanted to get onto with Leon, is that the connection of Christianity and Judaism to Egypt is a strong one.
To the Americas.
No, to Egypt.
I was saying the Americans.
Did you say the Americans?
The fella that was found in
no,
his grave with
the language.
Ten Commandments on a stone, written in Hebrew, in the Americas.
I don't know what you're referring to, so I don't know the veracity of what you're referring to. But in the Americas, I do not believe that the Hebrew script or language arrived, say, before Spanish. I think actually Spanish and Portuguese of non-American languages will have arrived there first, or maybe Norwegian, because the Norwegians obviously got to Greenland.
So, do you think there was a teaching that predates Christ that had elements of the Christ spirit within it that people were following, as comparably to the Native Americans and how they practiced, maybe the Essenes in Iraq, in the Middle East? Do you think they were following a Christ-like spirit? Because we know that Job was a form of Christ, and we know that I don't know if Moses was comparable, but we know that spirit was dwelling within communities. And do you think that spirit was being practiced within the Americas, so to speak, within Africa? And
the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit,
the fall of man.
The Holy Spirit works outside of the church. And so, for instance, the church fathers often point to people like Plato as being someone who God used to prepare Greco-Roman culture for the truths of the Christian faith. And so I'm quite happy to believe that the Holy Spirit would have been working in many cultures long before the missionaries get there. And then missionaries came with gold emboldened, embossed books. And that's why the Burmese Christians, the Karen, adopted the Christian faith with such vigour, because it corresponded to the legends of their own culture.
My grandparents were Burmese and they were Catholic.
Yeah. So the Karen Christians are being persecuted by Buddhist nationalists right now. They're fighting for an independent Karen state, and Christians around the world need to support them in their struggle.
Do you think they should be tarred with a brush of Buddhism, these people, or is it just
the Karen Christians? No, they're Christian. Why would I tar them with Buddhism?
You said that the Buddhist nationalists
the
are
Buddhist
persecuting them. Are you affirmed in that they are Buddhist?
But
they're not practicing Buddhism.
Yes, they are.
Because
yeah, I mean,
that's not it within the teaching.
Go and speak to the Dalai Lama, because he oversaw persecution of Buddhist minorities in Tibet. The reality is this mythos.
That's wickedness in high places.
The mythos that the Buddhists are just some peaceful religion is totally false. Buddhist monks are persecuting Christians in Sri Lanka. They go into churches and they disrupt Christian services.
Isn't that against the Dharma?
No.
And the teaching of
No.
Buddha? So Buddha condones the persecution of other faiths.
In terms of Buddhist practice, Buddhists have fought for their religion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I
You
know
got
that
to within the concept
they've
within.
defended themselves.
But we're getting again. You're taking us off the topic of African
Africa, yeah.
spirituality, because the point that I wanted to raise is that the connections between Egypt and the Judeo-Christian faith are deep and long.
Yeah, for sure.
The Jewish people came out of Egypt. Mount Sinai is found in Egypt. Many a holy see of the Commonwealth of the Church is found in Egypt.
Yeah, the oldest
We have
church.
patriarchs in Egypt
Not in
and in
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. We have many Christian theologians were from Africa, in Alexandria and Carthage. Many of the people that went to defend orthodoxy at the Council of Nicaea were Africans. Christian monasteries are found in Egypt. Monasticism started in Egypt. This is a European practice that we adopted from African spirituality. So we adopted an African spirituality in Europe. And I can say that proudly. Why? Because I believe in the Commonwealth of the Church. I believe in the heritage that all Christians share together, regardless of what their ethnicity is. Because Christians become one nation, one people, set apart unto the Lord when you become a Christian. And it's time that Christians rediscovered that in the way that we practice our faith. Any other questions before I stop?
I think I'm done, you know. The one about allow me.
Take him off the camera. No, I didn't get around to you actually. I wanted you to be here. Let me talk about it. So, in terms of is Christianity beneficial for Africa? Firstly, yes, because Christianity preserves the best of indigenous cultures while stripping away the worst of indigenous cultures, unlike Islam that simply imposes Arabization.
And what?
I haven't finished. 2, Christianity.
I'm not sure what you mean by worst or best.
It's decided by Christian values. So it emphasizes compassion. It emphasizes love, hope, faith. It emphasizes the idea of justice and prudence, chastity, goodness, kindness, self-control. You find all of these in local indigenous cultures. They may express themselves slightly different. Indigenous dress, nothing wrong with it. You know, we wouldn't be asking people to walk around in a niqab in the forests of Africa. Why? Because we don't Arabize, we don't Palestinianize people. So Christianity is good for Africa because it will allow Africans to keep the best of their own indigenous culture, their foods and their practices. If you're an African and you eat pork, you can continue to eat pork, etc., etc., so on and so on. What, sorry? Yeah, that's a discipline of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they're allowed to have the disciplines within their own fellowship. They have that authority. Let me continue on why Christianity is good for Africa. Christianity has contributed massively to the institutions of education and health right across Africa. The White Fathers... No, I'm talking about the countless Christian charities that have been set up right across Africa, of which Christian Aid is one, but there are lots of others. Yeah, I'm sure you have, but have you gone and looked into the good that they have done? I've met plenty of Africans, Leon. Leon, I've met plenty of Africans who have welcomed the contribution of Christian charities to Africa and what it has done. The number of children that have been educated by Christian institutions in Africa are legion. There is a Coptic Christian hospital, I think in Kenya, that gives charitable hospital treatment to the African people. It was the churches that set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions after apartheid fell in South Africa. It was the churches that set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in Rwanda after the genocide to bring those countries back together and to try to help people to heal. Christianity is good for Africa so long as it is African. And the African Christians need to make it their own.
When I say Christianity is Africa, right, in terms of is adopting Christianity as their way of life or religion.
Yeah, I'm giving you reasons. I'm giving you reasons because it teaches about self-control. It teaches about compassion. It teaches about justice. It teaches about solidarity with the poor. There is an erroneous teaching in African churches. The idea of the prosperity gospel. That is an erroneous teaching that is doing harm to the churches. And the quicker Nigerian Christians abandon this erroneous teaching, the better. Christianity teaches solidarity with the poor. It teaches a simplicity of life. It teaches self-control of the inner man. It teaches the cultivation of virtues.
You talk about self-control, so does like simply meditating. That teaches self-control.
It can cultivate self-control, but meditation on its own doesn't teach self-control.
Of course it does, because it teaches you.
No, it cultivates it. It doesn't teach it.
It doesn't. You don't get the premise for self-control within the meditation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's your intention.
Okay, well, it's still a
Yeah.
positive thing.
But Christians meditate, bro.
Oh, that's great.
Did you not know about Christian meditation?
That's great, but it's that you're saying these things, but other disciplines also have self-control, compassion,
Yeah.
all these things.
Yeah.
None of what you just said is just crystal.
Yeah,
No, it's a fair one. But let me ask you this question. I posit to you this truth, that love is the highest value. It's more important than knowledge, though it's helped by knowledge. It's more important than science, though it's helped by science. It's more important than power, but it can be helped by power. That actually, in your paradigm value system, when you start to hang your value system, the one that you stick at the apex should be love. Do you disagree? You agree or disagree?
I don't disagree.
You don't disagree. Do you agree?
I agree. Wisdom's
I agree.
high up there, isn't
It is, yeah. But the point is, Christianity is the faith that teaches that. And if there's one thing in this world that we need more of and not less, it's compassion. Africa and Africans, as well as lots of Europeans, need compassion.
That's one man and telling me that he's got a crucifix or the pacifist.
I did, because lots of people think that.
Isn't that compassion that he was showing?
Lots of people, no, I think that lots of Christians fall into a characterization of compassion. They think that compassion.
Explain to us what you mean
I'm
with
trying to, Leon, but you always interrupt. You always interrupt. So compassion, right? Lots of Christians, particularly in Western Europe, fall into a characterization of what compassion is. They think it is a gooey sentiment, and it isn't. Compassion is about standing up for what is right against what is wrong, and it is standing up for justice against injustice.
I missed it, you know.
And you're just going to have to watch the video. You're just going to have to watch the video, Leon. Compassion is about having that disposition in your temperament, that when you see someone who is weaker than you, you use your strength to aid them. That's what compassion is. And against, if you're going to bully anyone, bully the bully. That's what it is. And this is what the Christians did in the medieval period. Do you know the Christian knight? That knight of romantic Hollywood imagination, the one that went around the Sir Lancelot, that is a construct of Christian conscience. They took the brutish barbarian who wielded the sword, and they turned him by the will of the mind into a defender of truth and the weak through a code of chivalry. They made this brute who could hack to death a Viking or a Saracen, someone who would defend the mother and the child through a code of chivalry. And what we have lost in Europe and what we have lost in the church is this concept of the Christian knight. This concept of the man who is a man, who does defend his community, who does stand up against injustice, who does stand up for what is right, and is willing to throw himself fully into the battle, but does so with a heart that is soft. That does so that when he has defeated his enemy and his enemy lays prostrate before him, defeated, he doesn't take him through the triumphant arch as the Romans did, as a public spectacle of power, only to kill him in the dungeons afterwards, but reaches down, takes the broken and wounded body, bandages him back up, and helps him to go right, to go aright. This is the code of chivalry that gang needs.
King Alfred and Guthrum is a wonderful example of that.
Perfect example. Long before the code of chivalry, King Alfred, the only king of England that ever received the title Great, was a man who cultivated learning in his kingdom in an age of darkness. It was the Dark Ages after all. He was someone who sought to cultivate education. He built an equivalent of a Dark Ages welfare state, and he fought against the Danes to defend the Christian kingdom. Christians, you need to rediscover a code of chivalry. The Christian man needs to stop being a beta male that allows his community to be bullied, and he needs to start rediscovering valor. Saint Valentine, the word, that's where the word Valentinus it has the same root as the word valor. Christians need to rediscover valor and courage and cultivate it in our hearts. The Christian knight isn't an accident. He was a deliberate construct. The monastics used to go outside of the town, they'd gather all the relics of the saints, and they would bring all the warriors from the surrounding area, and they would say to them, if you do not protect the weak, the child, the orphan, and the widow, all of these saints will pray against you. God will send you to hell. And these knights then started to learn a code of chivalry that included the defense of the weak. That's why when the knights of the First Crusade went on the First Crusade, along with women and children, they defended those women and children on the way to Jerusalem.
Slaughtered a lot of Jews as well on the way.
I'm not saying that it was perfect. I'm not saying it was perfect at all. But the concept of the Christian knight is an ideal that we strive to. And the Christian man has to rediscover that. Now, I don't even know if I've answered your question or got off the topic, to be honest, Leon.
Give me a thumbnail.
Yeah.